Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the second meetup in our series of Leptos Monthly Meetups. This month, we've got an absolutely packed schedule. First up, we've got Greg, the creator of Leptos, coming on to talk about some changes coming up in the next version of Leptos, Leptos version 0.7. We've got Ben coming on to talk about Leptos and Spin, the WebAssembly system interface integration. We've got Lucas coming on to give an update about his Leptonic UI component library. Then we've got some longer speakers coming on. We've got Alex coming on to talk about his startups app, Housekey, that he's building with Leptos. We've also got a bunch of lightning talks where we'll hear about some more Leptos ecosystem libraries. We'll hear about Leptos internationalization, Leptos hotkeys, Leptos query, and Leptos image. Finally, we'll get a short update from Makish as well about Leptos Use, the utility library for Leptos. And finally, once we wrap up the stream, we'll be heading over to the Leptos Discord voice channels, where you can ask questions, talk with the library authors, and just do some networking. If you haven't joined the Leptos Discord server already, we've got a watch party going for YouTube in the Leptos Discord stage. So you can find a Discord invite if you just go to the leptos.dev homepage and join up there, where you can ask questions. We hope this will be a very interactive stream, lots of time for Q&A. Right, first up, we've got some Leptos core updates. If we can get Greg on stream here.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you all again. Thank you for hosting again. And yeah, I was just going to kick it off with a little bit of news about how the 0.7 update is going, and then actually show off, do a little demo, a little live coding, show off one of the big changes that I think will actually be a big improvement for everybody. So yeah, let's get started.
Sounds great.
So just to say a few words before I pull up my screen, I've been working on 0.7. It's now in this stage where I've moved things out of the kind of experimental repository stuff was into a branch in the main repo. You can follow along with that. It's the Leptos_0.7 branch if you want to take a look. And I'm basically just going through right now at the stage of going through all the examples, updating them to what needs to happen for them to work, making sure that everything that we need to have those basic examples working is there as I kind of build stuff out. There's not a real timeline. I'm hoping by the end of next month when Ben's giving a talk at Rust Nation to have kind of a good preview of what the next version looks like. But there are some things that I'm still kind of implementing, some stuff that still needs to be figured out. And I want to talk about one of the changes today. If you've been using the library for a long time, you probably know that there have been breaking changes. That's why we release versions like 0.2, 3, 4, 5, 0.6 that we just released. But those have mostly been pretty small, marginal changes, and they involve some updates to your code, but not too much. 0.7 is going to be kind of the second big paradigm shift, actually, since 0.1. So the 0.0 releases were very experimental. 0.1 through 0.6 have kind of been in one paradigm. And then there's going to be some change, not change so much to your code as a total rewriting of the internals of everything, but there are going to be some areas of breaking change. And when I think about breaking change and what makes sense, what I tend to think about are things that are good for developer experience, more ergonomic APIs, things that fix significant areas of bugs, and things that move us a little closer to kind of Rust idiom, make it feel more Rusty, work more with the language rather than our own kind of custom things. And one of the areas that is going to be changing is my favorite to debug and to deal with, the whole async resource and suspense world. So I've got a little example pulled up here. I hope folks can see it. I might even go another tick or two bigger on the text there for you. But But so this is kind of how async, how suspense works in the current version of the library, right? You've got this create resource and you've got suspense. And the way you deal with asynchronous data is you load it in a resource. We've got some wait function that's just gonna, return some value after a certain amount of time. And you've got suspense. And if you read a value that's a resource within a suspense, the suspense kind of knows, okay, I'm going to track this thing. And then it waits for that to finish, and then it shows the children. And in the meantime, it shows the fallback. There are a couple of big problems with this. One is just that it has generated over time a huge amount of bugs. Like certainly one of the areas that generates the most issues and the hardest to solve ones come around the world of suspense and transition. And part of that is the way that it works, right? When you render suspense, initially it renders the children, which are not ready yet, in order to track what it's waiting for. And then it falls back. And then when the resources are ready, it goes back to the children. And that means you have to do these kind of null checks. So like accessing a resource returns an option T, not the T. And that causes all sorts of issues when you're trying to nest things. It also makes it really hard to have resources that depend on other resources. Like if I have A2 and B2 here, and then I want some C that depends on both of those, it actually is really tricky to define a resource the right way. And people ask this all the time. So let's just go back to the drawing board, right? We're going to do a little live, coding here. How would we design this if we just wanted to do some async rendering in the view? So let's just say for now, A2 is just going to be wait, and you'll see the labels here, the A and the B are just so that we get some logging in the actual view. But so let's, have this one will wait for 3 seconds, and then it will return 3. So I have 2 futures, and believe me, these are futures, right? A2 is just a future that's going to resolve after 1 second and return 1. B2 is going to resolve after 3 seconds and return 3. So if I just want to make like an async view, can I do something like this? View A2.await and B2.await. Wouldn't that be nice if you could just like use await to access the value of a future to integrate with some asynchronous stuff? You could do it in a little async block here. You could render it right into your view. And we're talking about suspense, so let's just say like suspend, right? We're going to give trunk a second to cook here. And let's see what happens. Okay, so in this demo, right, the logging here is probably pretty small, but if you see when I reload the page, it says loading data for A, loading data for B. There we go. And then it shows it on the screen. That's great. That's kind of exactly what we wanted. So instead of these set values, let's do something like A.get and B.get. And we'll refresh again. And when I press these buttons, by the way, that's going to update the values of A and B. Okay, so you can see loading A, loading B, and then it resolves after a few seconds. And when I click A, nothing happens. Oh, right, well, I didn't do anything reactive here. This is literally just a future that returns this view with a really long statically typed annoying name. Okay, so let's do what we do to make things reactive, right? Let's wrap a closure around it. And then we're gonna have some ownership issues because these things are just futures. So we need to make them into functions that we're gonna call instead. All right, good, so we're compiling. And you see it's kind of loading. And of course, this isn't great, right? Oh, good, we've fallen back again. So this is loading, it's not giving us any fallback. Let's just say, with fallback, okay, good. So this API, by the way, this kind of trait extension builder API thing is not going to be the final form of it. We will have kind of component-based versions of it and so on. But as you can see, right, so now it gives us this loading fallback, and then when I update it, good, okay, it loads again. Now, there are a couple issues here that you may or may not notice. One is that even though I'm just changing A, it loads A and B, and then again, it loads A, and then it loads B again. But we haven't actually changed anything in the value of B. And that's because, of course, this works just like a future works, exactly like you would expect, right? Every time times is called, it is generating a new future, and it's waiting on a future. And each of these is just a function that returns a future, right? So we are actually waiting for that future to resolve. We're waiting for A to resolve each time. We're waiting for B to resolve each time. And what we really want is something like an async derived signal, so that we can depend on another signal, that we have fine-grained async updates, right? That we're not just running both futures every time. We're also going to add this little track down here, and like I said, these things will change a little. Okay, so we want an async derived signal, right? So what if we call that async derived? And we'll do the same thing to this one. Great. Now it's telling me to take away these calls. That's fine. Okay. So it seems like we actually have a thing called an async derived signal. And why don't I show you what it actually does here? So you've got loading A and B. And you'll actually notice when I refresh the page here, earlier it did loading data for A, then after a second, loading data for B. And the issue there, right, was that we were running these two futures serially, not concurrently. So we would load A, load B. And it's fine in this example, these are just timers, right? But you imagine that these are fetch requests or something. You're hitting two different APIs, you're doing two different things with async, right? You want to be able to run them concurrently. And you could just use something like a futures join or whatever, like you normally would in async Rust to do that. But then you still have that same issue where you're going to run both of them every time, right? So we've got this async derived future. It loads them both at the beginning concurrently. And then when we do a change, you'll see it only falls back for 1 second, not for the full 4 seconds. And it's only loading data for A. And then when I hit B, it's only loading data for B. It does it for 3 seconds, and then it falls back again. So that is pretty good, right? And you'll notice, by the way, right, that the async derived here, right, this is tracking essentially inside a future. It's a little hard to see because this wait function just returns a future, but it actually does track within the future. You don't have something like a resource currently does where you track the first argument to it and then feed that into the second argument. It's just like a derived signal. Okay, but so let's see if we can solve the one additional problem that we had with resources, which is kind of nesting and depending on resources. Let's have C, right? And instead of being this kind of a wait thing, this is going to be a little different. So this one is going to return an async block. And what's going to happen in here? We're going to sleep for 1 second. And then we're going to just return the values of these two, not the signals, but the async derived signals that we got here. And so we're not using C anywhere, which is fine. Let's read C out somewhere else. And let's say view C.await. And again, dot suspend, and we'll add a fallback. Okay. And then it's gonna, I think, give me an issue here because I knew it was gonna happen. All right, right, because this is not a future. Okay. I want to call suspend on the future. Oops. Not on the There we go. Yeah, so the issue there, right, was that I called suspend on the view that returned a paragraph. It's an extension of the future trait. So when I called it on something that wasn't a future, it was not pleased with me. Okay, but we should be good here. And now if we see, great. So we're loading C, loading A and B, and you'll see it's 1 more second and then it loads. And so in this example, right, we have something that we currently don't have at all, which is some async derived value. You can think of this as being like a resource in the current version, right? That depends on 2 others that automatically kind of reactively tracks them and that can just wait for them as futures. And this is actually one of the things about this that I think is really cool that I meant to show a little bit earlier. But you know, if I just let's see, if I do a2.get, what this actually returns is this enumerated type that's it could be loading, it could be complete, or it could be reloading. But you notice the same exact A2 here, I was able to just await as a future. And this is where Rust really is awesome, and working more with the grain of the language is really good. There's an into future trait. And if you implement into future for a type, you can just await on that type and you can tell the future when it should know that it's resolved. And that's exactly what we've done. So essentially, if you wait on an async derived that is already complete, it just immediately resolves. It says, fine, that's great. If you wait on something that's not complete yet, it will work like you would expect a future to work. And so what we're able to do is basically have these, you know, we've got a reactive graph that goes from the signals A and B down through the async derived signals, A2, B2, down to C2. And it works just like fine-grained reactivity works, where when I change A, it notifies A2. It doesn't notify B or B2. And then when A2 runs again and resolves, well, that notifies C2. And it follows the reactive graph asynchronously, just like you can currently do synchronously. And this ends up actually solving a bunch of problems, a bunch of those nested suspense problems. You know, I don't have to do any of this null checking here, right? When I await, if I await on here, just so you can, you know, believe me, that is not an option U32. That is just a straight up U32, which is really, really convenient for all of this stuff, the nesting, the derivation, and not to mention fixing some of those bugs. This is not the only thing that will be changing in 0.7, but I want to kind of show this off because I think it really shows why I've been taking so much time to rewrite so much of the internals. This would not have been possible to do in the current version. I could have created some weird form of this, but really, sometimes you get to a point where you do just need to rewrite a lot of the core of things in order to make progress on stuff like this. There are a couple of other areas where similar things will change. But if you notice this, right, it's not like you'll be able to just use the same suspense code as you did before with the move and the get and the map. The types are different, but you know, we can wrap this up in a nice suspense component with a fallback prop and so on. But basically, there will be rewriting of the async parts of your code, but some of it will actually be a big improvement. So the last thing I wanted to show was just a demo of what the kind of islands mode Hacker News example looks like right now. And if you've used islands, you'll know that the suspense stuff works the same. So even when it's only running on the server, you still create a resource, you create a suspense, you read under the suspense, you go through all this same stuff, even though it's not reactive, it's just on the server. And that's because that's also used to track the HTML streaming and so on. The new version, this is a Hacker News version ported over to that with the islands mode on. We have just, you know, some data. We get the path, we get the ID, and then we have just a plain future that returns a story. And then the view, the thing that this component returns, is an async block where we just wait for the story, and we either get an error or we get some story, and then we render it. So it actually ends up feeling much less like the sort of Leptos-specific resource suspense world, and much more like the ordinary Rust that you might be used to, where you've got an async block, you can wait on things. And so I'm hoping that this is a good example of a breaking example of a breaking change rather, where you move closer to the language using async await patterns that feel natural. You also solve some bugs, and hopefully it's a better developer experience, even though it will require rewriting some existing code to get there. That was kind of a lot. I don't know whether there are questions in chat or just other questions that people want to bring up. That was a pretty big chunk of material all at once. So I'm just sitting back for a minute and I'll take a sip of water.
Yeah, that looks really good initially. Alex is asking, so will resources still be available or are they being replaced entirely?
Yeah, I think particularly there are, call it 3 different senses in which resources still exist, right? One is that we still need some primitive to serialize data from the server to the client. So anything where you want to do what resources do currently, local resources that don't serialize, right, are basically this async derived thing. Regular resources that do serialize, we still will have. This was entirely a client-side rendering example. And we're going to tweak the APIs on that a little to make it easier to choose to use CRD for one resource, archive or something for another resource in the same program, rather than opting in with feature flags. But resources will still be there in that form in terms of almost throwing a promise across the network or resolving a future in the browser that started in the server, that kind of model. So those will still exist for sure. The other sense in which resources are useful are that sometimes it actually is nice to split out the reactive part that you want to track from the async part. And so we'll probably provide something that's basically a wrapper around this new primitive that behaves that same way, where you take an argument that you memoize, and then you take that as an argument in the second function that returns a future. So I would say in terms of like everything in your code that's create resource, that will be, you won't have to rewrite those, in that will still compile. It will work a little differently and it won't be required, but it'll still compile. The suspense fragments are the things that we'll probably have to change. And what that will look like is in the body of that suspense, you'll probably have still a suspense component, but maybe like an async block. And then instead of .get or .map or and then, all these things that we do to get around the null checking there, you can just .await. So the goal here is to take code that currently like goes across your page, nested, 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 and make it much more straightforward and linear, because instead of matching on a resource, you can just .await or whatever. But one of the things I'm really trying to be sensitive to is trying to keep as much existing code working as possible. So maybe we will even have suspense and suspense async or some other name, right? So that the current suspense model works. It's just, the issue is like the current suspense and resource thing works for the things it works for, and it's unfixable for the things where it doesn't. So yeah, maybe just keeping the migration path so that examples that are already working work is totally plausible, certainly in terms of migrating. But I think you'll find, particularly Alex, using islands and doing a lot of sort of loading one thing and going, that the new patterns are actually a lot easier. So yeah, totally understand the rewriting thing, but
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, initially it looks good. How were you planning on doing an alpha or beta release at some point for the?
yeah, for sure. I mean, this one will be my goal, right? Sometime in late March, to release the kind of like pre-alpha. Here's a thing that, once all of the examples are, green in CI, and the kind of stuff in the docs and so on works, then we'll do a pre-release and say, okay, everyone tell us how badly broken this stuff is. And then we'll have a long alpha period. We'll have a long beta period. I think we're lucky to be in a situation right now as a community, not the royal we, where 0.6 is pretty good and stuff pretty much works. And the problem is, the longer you go not making breaking changes, the more code has been written and the harder it is to break stuff. But I think this will be one where having a long alpha period, long beta period, making sure those things really do get tested will be pretty important. And once I'm pretty confident, right, with this, that once it is in an alpha, there won't be that many breaking things past the alpha. It'll be more like bug fixes. And I'm also pretty confident that this is the first time I felt like there's really a path toward 1.0 at some point where it feels like the right set of patterns. So, it kind of at a point, if there's a long alpha, long beta, if people want to try it out, I wouldn't expect this will be the last time I plan to do this to you, right? Without just renaming it to a totally different framework. So,
Well, that's exciting to hear. Well, thank you very much. If there are any other questions, feel free to get them in the chat on Discord or throw them up on YouTube. But thank you very much, Greg.
I see one question here in the chat from Baptiste. Does the future need to be send sync? So yeah, interesting. You caught me out. If I go back and I actually share my screen again for a second, you're going to see that I've cheated a little bit here just to not confuse people too much. So in the definition of the future here, there's this send wrapper because I'm using a timer that's in the browser, so it's not send. And I put this little wrapper around here just to make it send. But basically, the only difference is that there will be a few like new unsync, right? So one of the differences in 0.7 that is going to be another one that will take a little while for people to get used to, but I think is probably the right call, is that for all of the stored value types, so everything like a signal or a memo currently that gets stored in the reactive system and you get this thing out that's just copy, those will all be the type here, right? Like the value will need to be send and sync. And the reason for that is that we are trying to make the whole reactive system send and sync and strip away a lot of the weird stuff we currently have to do with Axum to get around that. And there are basically ways of using unsend types in the reactive types still, and there are ways of actually getting, whether this is even worth looking at is another question, but you can convert into basically arced types of any of these that pull them out of that reactive ownership, and those don't need to be send and sync and so on. But the futures,
Convenient.
basically, we can either spawn a task to load that future, and we can spawn it in general, in which case it needs to be send and sync, like Tokyo will spawn it just onto any Tokyo worker thread it wants, or we can say spawn local and it will spawn onto a one that's pinned to the current thread. So the plan is to support both of those. There will be some migration around RC to ARC and so on for unsend and unsync types, because we just want to be able to strip away some of the hackiness. We're currently basically pinning Axum requests and responses to a single thread in order to allow unsend signals, and it's not clear that it's worth it. And it's been on the radar for a super long time. I think one of the oldest issues that's still open.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good to hear that that's simplifying things. Well, especially as Axum gains more traction in the community. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that probably does it for questions.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Greg, and look forward to hearing more about this as it develops more.
Well, thank you, and I'll be looking forward to sharing those updates with you.
Great. Talk to you soon. Up next, we've got Ben coming on to talk about the Leptos and Spin integration. He's been doing a lot of work to get that up to snuff for Leptos 0.6.
Hello, can everyone hear me all right? Hello?
Hello. Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Yeah, so my work over the last month has mostly been in getting the Leptos Spin integration up to snuff, right? The last month, and if you watch the Fermion Spin live stream, we demoed it and we showed a starter, but there are a bunch of things missing from there, right? We didn't have the ability to set headers or do cookies. The server functions were old and it wasn't quite up to 0.6 yet. And I spent a pretty good portion of the time making the 0.6 paradigm work with the spin/WASI types. And that was kind of a struggle. But I thought I'd take the opportunity to kind of show you the starter, which Daniel's been doing great work on, and how easy it is to deploy, because it is really, I think, the fastest thing to deploy in our ecosystem right now. So I'm going to share the screen here. Let's see if this works. Whoops, let's do, yeah. Okay, can everyone see the screen all right?
Yep.
I'm gonna take that as a yes. So there are two versions of the starters. The one that we maintain at start-spin, and then the one Fermyon maintains. The one that Fermyon maintains is a little bit behind. We'll get them both close soon. I'm going to skip the installation steps to add WASM32 WASI, WASM32 unknown, and just go straight to the copying of the template here. Leptos demo. So we've got a new project here. You can see it's already scaffolded. It's got all of the things that you would expect in it. And then if I build it here with the spin build, it'll compile in a sec. And this does take a second. One of the things we've changed recently with it is that we have programmed Cargo Leptos now to not do a binary build for the server, but to do a lib build and to compile that to WASI, which removes an extra step from the compilation. First, you had to compile the full Cargo Leptos binary and the WASM front-end binary, front-end lib, and then do the WASI server, and we've removed that. So that should be pretty good here.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Ben. Could you make the text just a little bit bigger?
Which one? We'll do that one. See if I can make this larger. I don't know how to zoom in KDE right now. So I'm sorry, it's compiling. It's not super interesting right now.
Yes, something we're all familiar with. Rust compilation takes a little bit first time.
I haven't tried yet, and that's one of the things I still need to do. They kind of only have one build command, and it's building in release mode right now. But I need to add on to the spin CLI so that you can do a dev build with a bunch of the optimizations that you might expect. All right, so it's built here. So we're gonna shove this down. We can put it up. Uh-oh. That's because I've got something else running on 3000, which I did not think about when I was doing this. Okay, I think I can change that here. No. Just a moment while I look up how to kill something on. I'll try kill all spin here. There we go. Okay. So if you hit spin up, it's immediately ready, and you can go 27.1.3000, and you get the lovely, front end here. You can click it, and you can see that it gets clicked. But the neat thing is that we've actually architected this from the spin toml here, that it's already created kind of the structure for it. So if you've got spin installed, I can just do spin deploy, and you have an account with them and all that stuff. And it will automatically put it up in less than a minute. And that's pretty ridiculous. And you don't have to worry about I'll create a new one here, give it a weird name, and it'll go up. And it actually uploads the WASM files, which are like 50 megabytes maybe. So instead of the Docker files where you're at 100 megabytes or 2 gigabytes, it can take a really long time to push up. There it is. It's already live. So I can go to this demo page here, and there it is. I don't know why the little Firefox thing, there we go. And yeah,
That is incredibly fast.
it is really one of the nicest things I've seen in a while. Like I remember when Remix got Cloudflare Workers, and that was kind of a sea change. And now we've got Fermyon WebAssembly Workers. And there's been some really exciting improvements and things coming out in the WASI world recently. Like the component model is now pretty much out. So soon we're going to be able to have WebAssembly components that can talk to each other and can be built in almost any language. And it's really exciting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes in the future.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what I had to show you guys for today. I think the Spin Starter is production ready. It's got everything the other Axum and Actix integrations do. And I don't think it has too many bugs, but if it does, let me know and I'll fix it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that looks great. Yeah, I've been playing around with that a little bit myself. There is a little bit of a learning curve to get into the WASI community and figure out how that all works. But yeah, it gets you great startup time, like on the order of 50 milliseconds compared to a container that might take 350 milliseconds just to start up. So you get that snappy response time.
Oh yeah, and it scales to 0, which is pretty nice if you don't have any load. So.
Yeah, Fermyon, I think, is also working on improving their deployment of Spin itself, their platform to Kubernetes as well. So if you're looking to deploy on your own infrastructure, that's something that you can integrate into a larger ecosystem. Let's see. Do we have questions coming up for Ben? We've got.
Good for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Alex is asking why we made this. What problem does it solve? Fast deploy?
Sure. I think that's a question, and I kind of struggled with that, at the beginning. I think there's an argument to be made that it's basically the same argument that JavaScript makes for like Cloudflare workers or Cloudflare pages, right? Potentially, you can run these workers in more regions. You can only pay for what you use. You can take advantage of the WebAssembly security guarantees. I think those are the big ones here. I mean, compared to say Fly, for example, you've got to set up the Docker file. You've got longer deploy times. You've got to deal with Axum a little bit more. Spin is kind of just the opposite of that, right? And they both have a spot, right? You choose Spin for some things and Axum for other things, for sure.
Yeah, it is still early days for WASI as well. Yeah, the component model is still it's still brand new, but being able to write part of your app in in Python if you want to create a machine learning component and have that easily integrate with your Rust Leptos app, is something that I'm looking forward to trying myself. And yeah,
Sure.
there's those tutorials out there that can help you get started. But also like you mentioned, the security is one of the big benefits.
I'm currently working on porting my blog over, and I'm going to be writing up some things about some of the pitfalls and some of the stuff that's a little bit rocky right now. Some of it's also new and it's all not super well documented. So keep an eye out for that. if you'd like to try it. The more complex stuff. I mean, the starter works great if you just want to deploy a Leptos site. So,
yeah. Have you done any performance comparisons between Spin and native server like Axum?
I have. It is rough right now because I'm still building out the performance templating, but it seems to be roughly equivalent to the Axum ones. Like, it depends a little bit on what's running the WASI, right? And WASI is a bit slower. WebAssembly WASI is a bit slower than native REST, on the order of like a factor of 2. But on the other hand, it can start up quicker, right? So if you're comparing to, say, a Lambda function, that has to start up for much longer. So I'd say that it's probably going to be a little bit slower, but not super noticeable. I'll have more hard numbers once I get the performance testing suite up. So,
all right, nice, something to look forward to.
Yeah,
and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the next coming months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Ben.
You're welcome. I'm happy to come on here and talk about stuff for sure.
All right, it looks like Daniel actually, I think, dropped off for just a second. Are you there?
Sorry for dropping out there.
No worries. All right, thanks, Ben.
Yes, thank you very much, Ben. Up next, we've got Lucas coming on to give us a quick update about Leptonic. He's got a couple of new things in the work for his UI component library. All right, take it away, Lucas.
Yeah, hi, welcome back. Nice to be back on stream. Just wanted to give you a quick update about, as told already, the Leptonic library, which provides a bunch of components you can already use in your app if you want to. I touched on this whole building your website in any UI framework in the last meetup we had. You have basically two concerns, the one being styling and the other being behavior. And what Leptonic did or does until now is, or until recently, is to provide somewhat holistic, you could call it opinionated components, which provide a lot of features or some features, but aren't really easy to change around or customize to your own liking or to your own needs. And this is a problem that many UI component libraries have and had in the past. And some of them solve that problem better than others. Some, for now, let you copy and paste basically all the source.
Looks like we might be having some technical issues with Lucas here. He seems to have frozen on us. So hopefully we can get him back in a minute here. But in the meantime, should we bring Alex up to talk about Housekey, his open access database of detailed property information that helps you decide where to live, work, and invest. We bring up Alex.
Hello. Hey, how's it going?
Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Looking forward to hearing about your startup.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I guess I'll just get started here. So just going to talk about my startup Housekey, and we use Leptos, of course, which is why I'm here. Talking about kind of the commercial application of Leptos, and to answer any questions people have about larger Leptos projects, because we've been creating this one for over a year, so it's one of the bigger Leptos websites out there. So I'll just give a bit of background on Housekey and what we're attempting to do and what it is. So we're a venture capital-backed startup that is trying to categorize basically all of the property information in the world. We live in Canada, so we're starting with Canada, and then hopefully soon moving to the US for property data there. And so you can imagine it kind of as the Wikipedia of property data, or kind of like a multiple listing system that's open access instead of locked down by the real estate industry. So the reason that we use Leptos, it's a very small company. It's only myself and my brother actually, and I do the majority of the website code. We started with Remix a couple of years ago, and we were using TypeScript, and we kind of ran into a lot of issues with trying to create a very large project with basically with TypeScript. Like Remix was never really the problem. I tried Next as well. So those frameworks, like they were fine, but the issue was like we're dealing with so much data and so much complexity that the undefined errors were basically just like absolute killers. So we're like, okay, well, we're not going to hire a bunch of devs anytime soon because like, it's really expensive to hire developers. So we're like, well, how can we make a big site that's going to be reliable around a giant database without having all of these undefined errors and random problems that seem to come, in my opinion, with TypeScript. Just wasn't very suitable, in my opinion, for the problem. So we're starting to look at other languages and stuff like that. We had written our the database that powers everything in Polars and Rust. So Polars is like Pandas, but it's a Rust variant that's very fast. So we really like using Rust in that capacity. I was like, well, can we just make the website in Rust, right? At that time, that was a couple of years ago when we were deciding that, and web frameworks in Rust were not as established as they were now, and they're not as streamlined as they are now. And a lot of the issues that Rust frameworks had at the time of being very large and stuff have now been solved, and I'll talk about that a bit later. I was looking at the Rust web frameworks, and there was like U and Dioxys, and I came across Leptos, and I knew that it was similar to Solid.js in its approach. And one thing that appealed to me is like that I like simple things, and I find if you're going to build a large system with very few people, you need to keep things as simple as possible because you have to basically keep the whole thing in RAM, and if it gets too complex, the speed of which you can iterate becomes almost nothing. The fact that you had the fine-grained reactivity of Leptos, and like it makes it kind of easier to hunt down bugs and stuff because you don't have like potentially a bunch of race conditions from like a shadow DOM just kind of like refreshing everything at once. The simpler approach appealed to me, so I looked into Leptos, and I think it was on a Primogen stream or something that I actually saw it for the first time, and I thought, well, like if this works, like if we can use this, it solves a lot of problems that we have. It's an approach that we like, and like. The issue being at the time that people thought that maybe the Rust web frameworks were too new to handle larger commercial projects. We're a startup, we're high risk anyway. But on top of that, I think something that I saw that I think a lot of people didn't is like the community around Leptos is very, very powerful, basically, and very helpful. And so imagine if you have a problem with React, you can talk to like Dan Abramov or someone who made React, right? Like that's a very huge benefit. And so it's been nice to be able to talk to the devs of Leptos like Greg and Ben and get help when we run into problems, and that actually kind of de-risks it for us in kind of a surprising way. So we went with Leptos, and basically, that I think it's a myth that people are saying they think you're going to run into some edge case that you just can't engineer around if you use the Rust web frameworks, and a lot of the language around the Rust web frameworks is that they're incomplete or basic compared to the existing JavaScript frameworks, but realistically, I haven't found that. We haven't run into any issue that was not pretty simple to engineer around, and most projects on the internet, including ours, are basically glorified wrappers around databases and stuff like that. And we do have some advanced interactivity with the map and stuff like that that we also like Leptos for over something like HTMX. HTMX is awesome, and I agree 100% with the simplistic approach. If you can get away with HTMX, that's great. But for us, we don't know what the future interactivity of this product will look like. So Leptos gives us a lot of latitude there, where it's like no matter what interactivity is needed down the road, we will be able to solve it with Leptos. So it was kind of like, that's kind of a huge benefit for us. If we use HTMX, we could run into some very interactive things we want to create that we just can't really easily create without doing some kind of Frankenstein implementation of some other reactive system on top of it. So anyways, I guess I'll just demo a bit of how Husky works, and we'll just kind of show you actually what the actual thing is. So basically, we can search across Canada for houses and stuff like that. Let's see here. Okay, so we'll just go to a house in Calgary, and we just have a massive database of we're collecting every piece of public information we can find on these houses and stuff like that, and just providing it on basically a massive page of data. So all sorts of stuff like what would it likely sell for, what would it list for, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of insight into, and something that's actually very interesting about this is our numbers don't match the real estate. What are they called? Like the CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Board's numbers. Like our averages and their averages don't line up, and this is like real data. So we're really interested to do more analysis on that and figure out what's going on. But we have like things like listing data depending on what we've seen on the internet about this property. And we want to keep this as like very open data so that like you can be pretty certain that like, because right now, okay, so if someone overprices a house on the market, how would you know? Like you could actually get it professionally appraised, but even that's just like a range, and it's like, you know, appraiser only checks like 5 or 6 houses in the area. We can compare a house with like, you know, 10,000 other houses in the area that sold recently or over the last year, and we can be pretty sure about the accuracy of a prediction, right? So that's kind of the commercial side of this is like, yeah, this data is great for the public, and it's kind of like Wikipedia. It's like the public has access to all this data for free. But if you were a company and say you want to do like an automated valuation model, we have an API that basically you can like predict prices. You can get any information you want on any property. So if someone's doing data science or something like that, you can't really access the realtor's database. Even realtors can't access the whole database. They generally can only access the city that they're in. So it's like, how do you get like, you know, countrywide data to do science if you're a government or something like that, and like actually figure out like trends and stuff like that? And that's kind of like what the point is. It's like if you're an insurance company, maybe you want to pre-fill out a form for someone. They just put their address in. You go, okay, well, we know how big your house is. We know how many bedrooms it has. That, you know, reduce friction is one possible use case. But also maybe you're an insurance company. You just want to figure out like the market trends of the area. So you need a way to do that. And so that's basically what our company is aiming to provide globally eventually. So one thing we use actually, it's really cool, is Ben actually made this FeeMark, it's called, and it actually does all this code highlighting and stuff here. So if you ever need code highlighting, use Ben's FeeMark package for Leptos. That saved us a lot of time just to get nice looking pretty code for our API examples and use case examples and stuff like that. So I'm just going to take a look. I think there's a couple of questions. What do you do for components that aren't available? Graphs, for example. Do you use Canva? I'll go back to that property page here. This is an SVG image rendered on the server. We could have, for a second, I was using like plotly.js on the client side, but like it's kind of cool to have the interactivity, but for the simplicity of this and like the amount of charts and stuff. Well, one of the issues that we have is basically like, this is an interesting thing from actually from audio engineering that I've learned, like audio recording. A lot of audio engineers mix with analog equipment just so they can't keep tinkering with things. And I almost didn't want super interactive graphs, because it's like as soon as you have like interactivity of the graphs, you just like start going down this rabbit hole of like just like, you know, so I just like, okay, we'll just render these on the server. We'll keep it really simple. Do you want to zoom in on which? Zoom in on the...
Just a little bit. That would be great.
Like on the website? Like that?
Yeah, the website.
Is that good? All right. So there are SVG images generated by one of the leading Rust plotting packages, right? And since that doesn't have to load on the client, because we actually use experimental islands, I think it's just called islands feature now. And I'll talk about that actually as well. So yeah, anyways, these graphs are generated by what's called plotters, the big Rust one. So you can make any plot you want, like, because it's a huge package. And the client doesn't have to load any of that. So this is actually a lazy loading image, right? We just use an Axum endpoint for this. So this chart is actually a lazy loaded image, so it doesn't even load unless someone views it. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, it's kind of a good technique, right? Because if it costs a little bit of CPU usage to, you know, load all those predictions for that price, right? And I believe it does get cached as well as an image, so that kind of saves it, saves some processing as well there. What was I going to talk about?
Components that aren't available.
Components that aren't available.
Like, have you had to do a lot of
The one we were mostly worried about was the map, like because the leaflet is kind of like dominant in that space, right? And we're like, well, we're gonna have to write some WASM wrappers, but luckily, DG Santana, I'm not sure what his actual name is, but he's one of the guys that seems to be developing Leptos, and he luckily had made like, so this is like really the most complex of our components, right? Because this is a leaflet map with full interactivity. So luckily that had been created, right? Because if that wasn't created, that would have been a much, we would have had to make it ourselves. That would have been, kind of a bummer. Probably not the end of the world. But the answer to that is like components that aren't available hasn't really happened to us yet. And I think that's kind of like part of like what I've been talking about of like the myth that that things aren't really ready in the Rust ecosystem for commercial applications or they're in their infancy. There isn't much I can think of, especially with like those big component libraries that have come out. Like I'm not sure what the one for Leptos is called, but that huge component library and everything that has everything from sliders and whatnot in it, like stuff way beyond what we've ever even used. So like I just like, that'd be the question to me is like, what do you do about that in JavaScript too? It's like, to me, it's like you almost have a one-to-one parity at this point of, if even this Leptos one is available for leaflet, like, that's pretty good. There's a couple Leptos specific charting libraries out there that are coming out that are not quite full featured, but you always could, there's probably WASM bindings for plotly.js or something like that, or you can do what I did and just use plotters and generate an image for your end users. Which, oh right, I was going to talk about experimental islands, and that was one unanswered. That was kind of a sacrifice we were willing to make because they're like, well, WASM sites are big. And we're like, well, you only load it once, and it's a high intent website. Like if you're coming to this website, you're coming for very specific data, and you're going to wait till it loads because you're going for a very specific reason. So we're like, yeah, it's probably not a big deal for us if there's a couple meg initial load. Experimental Islands solved that problem with basically gives us a logarithmic growth in website kilobytes compared to the scale of the website, because we're not really sending anything except the interactive parts down to the client. So that reduced, I don't actually know what the size of our WASM is right now. I'm afraid to check it because I haven't actually checked it in a while, and maybe it's actually massive and I just missed it and it'll be embarrassing, but I guess we'll check here. I'm hoping it's only, it's not like absolutely massive. All right. 1.87 megabytes. That's probably, I'm not sure if that's the transfer size or what, but, transferred cache. And we can just get to reload that. No. Oh, sorry. Where is it? The transfer size. So the transfer is 700 kilobytes. I could probably get that down. I think I have the regex package in there by accident and a few others. But, that's optimizable. 700 kilobytes is, the size of a large image. You load it once when you go to the site, and that's also including the leaflet map and everything. And it's not going to get much bigger than that as we scale the site up, unless we add a lot more like really interactive pages. That will never get that much bigger. It'll never become so big that it's actually an issue, right? So that problem was solved for us. We were just intending to make that sacrifice of having a 2 to 5 megabyte WASM file. We're like, yeah, it's unconventional. The internet's pretty fast now. It's worth it for the trade-offs. But again, it turns out that problem also kind of solved itself over time, and now we don't even have that problem. So yeah, like a lot of the problems you think you might have using Rust on the website for commercial applications or large applications, we just haven't, like, we expected to hit some, but we haven't really hit any. So that's been really quite a nice surprise for us. We thought there would be more downside. We haven't really seen it. So it's been actually fairly smooth.
Wow. That is really great. So do you use, are you using Material UI?
No, this is all just custom Tailwind styled CSS. It's all just custom. Nothing. There's no Bootstrap or any UI system. It's all just plain CSS. Yeah, no component library. literally nothing. Just Tailwind.
Yeah,
and
so
being like, and not even a design document, just me as I go along being like, oh, that looks good. Oh, that looks good. Like a design team would be like, what is going on here? Because they'd be like, hey, I want you to design a new page. Where's your design docs? You'd be like, there are none. And they'd be like, oh my God, this is crazy. But when you're one person making a website, you got to save time somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
It turned out looking okay, so I'm fine with it. Like, as long as it looks good enough, people are mostly there for the information anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I've tried loading it up myself. It actually loads up pretty quick.
Yeah. It's not after it's loaded, it's quite responsive and quite fast. We do a lot of caching layers as we go along as well. Like the database caches a lot, and so it helps it be quick and snappy. But and also the one thing we do is most of this is server rendered, so yeah, it's blazingly fast. Most of this is server rendered. We could switch it to do streaming and actually potentially be faster, but we keep most of it as server rendered as possible, just for SEO benefits and other things. Even though I think with streaming you can get those same benefits, but I just don't trust Google to totally scrape it properly without it having everything populated first. That's just me though, because SEO is very important for our site, because it's how people find it as they search addresses, right? So we need good SEO on all the pages. But the size reduction after upgrading to 0.7, that's another. We will upgrade to 0.7 obviously at some point. We like to keep updated as much as possible to help the Leptos community find any bugs early, because with the project that's larger like this, that has a lot of different approaches in it, it loads like every different kind of resource, and it does a lot of things. So when we upgrade, if there are any like obvious bugs, we'll probably catch them pretty quick. So that's one thing we've been trying to do, is keep up to date with the later versions of Leptos. It also just saves us hassle. If we want to do a huge update from 0.3 to 0.7, it would be a lot more work than just updating from 0.6 to 0.7 or something like that as well. So,
definitely.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you notice a size reduction going to 0.6?
The biggest size reduction was the experimental islands one, but I believe there was a slight reduction in size from 0.6 to 0.5 anyway. But yeah, the islands by far is the biggest, because if you want to see the smallest basically a Leptos site can be, leptos.dev is islands based now, and I think its WASM is like quite tiny, like 200, 300 kilobytes or something, really small. And I think 0.7 might be even smaller, so that'll be interesting to see. Like that problem seems to be really getting solved, because even React is like 50 kilobytes or something like that just by itself, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't checked it recently, but yeah, again, if you're comparing React to Leptos, I don't.
Yeah, like you're getting like the lines are pretty blurry of along. Even from a year ago, it's just like everything's come along so far in the Rust website that it's quite impressive, and a lot of the problems just aren't problems anymore. So we're really happy that we chose Leptos, and that because the scalability of the system, it's like we know that this is going to do what we need at this point. So like that's great, because rewriting it from Remix into Next and experimenting, like that takes a lot of time. So it's cool that that Leptos can handle what we need it to do with relative ease, it seems. So yeah. Any other questions about anything?
I have a question actually. Have you had to integrate JS libraries into your?
I do. I have done that a little bit, and I do some JS hackery in some places. Like I do one thing. I don't like to send I didn't want to send the header as an island down to the user, because it's pretty unnecessary. But just from the how it's kind of built, if I had just made this one button an island, it would have also kind of included this next all this information here to be included and stuff like that. So I just used JS to just do it's just a simple button. It's like if they click this, then open this, then show this or hide this. So I did that way. It stays on the server. You don't have to send it down to the client anymore. That's like one minor one. I did. I do one for image uploads where it compresses the image on the client side in JavaScript. Like you could just do that in WASM and stuff like that, but I found it just a script tag and 20 lines of code later, it's just done. So I do that in places, but Plotly was one where we wanted interactivity and graphs initially, and I integrated that a little bit, and then we went the other way with it. But yeah, like that's also an escape hatch that's pretty nice. It's like if you ever actually run into anything where you just need to use a JS library, it's actually not that hard to do, whether you even do the proper WASM bindings or whether you just write a script to do it. Like you can always engineer around it in some way. Yeah, it hasn't really been an issue.
Well, that's great. Yeah, well, it's awesome to hear that that Leptos has been working so well for you,
Yeah.
and actually see it.
At this point, I actually imagine that we're probably not the only commercial project on Leptos now, but I have a feeling there might be a few, but they're just not in the Discord because Leptos is getting pretty widely used now, and I think that people are figuring out that it's getting pretty full featured and pretty complete, and there's a lot of advantages. Like people are getting pretty tired of TypeScript, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is it was great hearing from you, Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah, best of luck with your startup. And,
thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Great. Up next, we've got Lucas coming back on to finish his quick update about Leptonic.
Yeah, welcome back. I successfully shut it down and started it back again, my router, and I hope I stay online this time. Yeah, I don't really know where I left the call. So I think I would just continue and start again with the point I was talking about. Okay, one point that I mentioned briefly in our last meetup is that when you're building UI frameworks, you're basically juggling around with multiple concerns. One being styling potentially, one being the behavior of the things you build. A third one potentially being accessibility concerns that you might want to bring into your application and make it accessible as much as you can. What Leptonic does right now, and yeah, it has some components. Some would say they are enough and more than they need. Some others would say they're not even close to what we need, and they are not even close to as customizable as we would like them to be, which is the reason why I started working on integrating a lot of stuff that the React Aria library, which is a React library built by Adobe, has done already, which is factoring out a lot of behavior stuff and accessibility related stuff into hooks, which are basically functions you can call and provide all that behavior internally and just provide you with some kind of nicely usable API to incorporate that into your own components that you build yourself. You can style however you want yourself. And therefore have an app that's much more flexible than what you would be able to write otherwise, but just using these holistic, opinionated components that Leptonic supports right now. Because if you're writing any component in Leptos or any other framework that does component-based architecture, you're always forcing a lot of stuff onto the users of these components if you share them in a library. For example, imagine any component, like a select component, which renders the selected element, which acts as a button. You click on it, it opens an overlay. The overlay renders a bunch of items you can scroll through, and there's a lot of stuff going on in a component as simple as this one. And it also renders a lot of HTML markup, which is not really related to behavior directly, but influences styling on its own, because how markup is laid out affects how it's displayed on the page at the end. And if a component you provide in the library renders a lot of nested items, how do you make it available? How do you make any item that you render in this markup available to a user? Like if a user wants to use Tailwind to style the components, how do you do that? You can obviously take on some class attribute value and pass that on to, I don't know, the root element of the markup tree you're rendering. But sooner or later, someone will come in and say, oh, that's not enough for me. I have to do something with greater flexibility. The React Aria library comes with a bunch of stuff, like accessibility concerns, interactability things. Like if you just want to use something as a button and you're not really sure if you can use the real button component, or you don't want to use a real button component, or you can't, but you want all this behavior that's typically attached to a button or just some element you can press. Even that is not so easily done. You could imagine just add an on-click handler and you're done. But as soon as you dig deeper and look into how does it work on mobile, does it work all the time, everywhere, on every browser? Or how does these events get triggered? These fake events, because you're not really clicking when you're having a touch device and interacting with that with your finger or with a pen or something else, or have a screen reader interact with the site. Yeah, really complicated. Just the use press hook, which makes some element on your page pressable with a nicely specified API, like here's your callback whenever the thing is pressed, or when the press starts or is canceled, we're gonna notify you. Even that is like 1,000 lines of codes in React Aria, which is massive, I would say, for such a small thing, like presumably small thing. And yeah, I started to port a bunch of that stuff. I'm still working out the licensing stuff. They are Apache licensed, and I hope I can make Leptonic as open as possible. I don't know if MIT license is still a valid option, but I hope so. Yeah, I can quickly show my screen. Let me just do that. No, these were. This is wrong. Share. Do you see my website? I hope you do. This is the Leptonic documentation website. Some of you might have seen this already. It's actually built using a Docker image, and we talked about it earlier about image sizes. I think the Docker image is around 30 megabytes in a release build. It's kind of small. And if we go into the documentation, we see that there is a hooks section in the documentation, which is really limited right now because there's not a lot of stuff that I already got time to do. But I already mentioned this pressing behavior. This is a button, and instead of just adding an on-click handler, I use this this use press hook, and then I spread attributes that the hook returns onto that button, and I spread a lot of events onto that button. It isn't that convenient right now because you can't really spread event handlers, but may come. So I can click it, I get a press start event, I can leave the element with my mouse and the press ends. If I can re-enter the element while still holding down my left mouse button, but then release, I actually pressed the element. I could send a disabled flag to this use press hook, and then none of these events fire at all. And there's some other stuff that builds on top of this. This is more like interactive behavior things, and then there are more component-oriented things like a use button. You can use this hook, provided some input. This would probably be a builder type that you don't have to use into at some points. You can leave out optional stuff, and this would simplify this a lot more. You get out some properties, and these properties contain attributes. You can spread these attributes. You can add a bunch of event handlers. This is, as I said, not that convenient because you have to specify them all and have to know that they exist. But if you've done that and you have that kind of button, you're encouraged to use a real button if you can. But just to demonstrate this, I used a div, and it just alerts with a press message, and it does if I click on it. And this also works, or should perfectly work, if I'm on a touch device, using whatever input I might imagine using, or using a screen reader to trigger this button. I can also focus this button and then trigger it using keyboard events. So this is everything of that is part of this use press hook. I thought about how this should be integrated into Leptonic, because it currently only provided these components, which are, as already said, easy to use. You just import a slider component and you get the slider that you can move around and interact with. Or you can customize this slider with some properties and you're good to go. But with these hooks alone, you're in a much more raw situation. We would have to rewrite all these components using these hooks to make your life easier. This would certainly work, but I think there is an intermediate step between hooks and fully fleshed out components. As I said, you might not want to use the pre-built components that are here because you want more flexibility. And the goal is to provide atoms which are rather small, which are Leptos components, but rather small, encapsulating just one thing at a time. And at best, only rendering a single element and not a deeply nested tree of HTML markup. So you can easily specify your own classes if you want to use something like Tailwind for styling. Yeah, the last thing I've done was this use overlay hook. You can have, I have this fake button here. If I click this, this opens this overlay. If I click again, it's hidden again. I can change the position. I can change it to be shown on the top left. I can show it outer left. I can then say, okay, show it on the top edge or show it at the bottom edge or whatever. If I, for example, show this on the left and show this below the element, and if I then zoom in the side a bit more, you will see that it changes its position automatically. If the space on the bottom of the targeted element is not sufficient, it will move, which is everything, which all is configurable if you use this hook, or is made configurable in the future. Yeah, and I hope over time that many of the already existing components, I want to let them stay here, can be internally rebuilt using these atoms and using hooks. For example, if you have a the slider I showed already, you might be able to create the slider using a slider wrapper, then a slider track, and then a slider thumb inside that track, or multiple slider thumbs if you have a range slider which supports multiple controllable inputs here, so that you have full control over how this thing is rendered and how this thing behaves. I think that would be it for now.
Yeah.
If there are any questions, I have a bit more time to answer them.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for the update, Lucas. That looks great. It's looking forward to seeing how this develops over the next couple of months. I know it's a ton of work, yeah. If anybody wants to help them out or test out components, by all means. Yeah, that it looks good. Looks like we can move on to lightning talks coming up here pretty quick. I'm sure we'll get you back, Lucas, to talk about.
Actually, we had one quick question about adoption. How's adoption been?
I can't really say. There's been so much work going on the main branch. I think some people might just use this or fork their own. Some people use the already released versions, but these just have the regular components. If you have done anything with it, feel free to post this in the Leptos community Discord server. I'd be very eager to see this if you've done anything. On a release schedule, Greg told already something about a 0.7 release. This is a release of this is a lot of time in the future, I would guess.
All right, thank you. And then I'll jump back off stream, but I think there was one more here from Alex. If you want to read it, Daniel.
Yeah. So how does the Tailwind styling work? Like, can you override the defaults?
Okay, I haven't made a Tailwind demo as of now. I want to do that at some point, but conceptually, you can use these hooks to create your entirely own components. Use no components from Leptonic as a library at all.
Right.
And with your own components, you can do whatever you want. You just add the classes to the elements you create in your view macro. If you use an atom, which is a component, a Leptos component, I would always add a specific class attribute or a class property to this component, so you can override or set classes. These atoms probably won't come with any classes at all, or a single class representing this atom, so you can style it out the box if you want to use standard CSS styling. And most of the components here already support a class attribute, but as I said, it's not really clear where these classes you provide should land on, because some components are a bit deeper. Root element mostly chosen.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope this answered the question.
Yeah.
There's still a bit more that can be done in Leptos as a library. I think if you use some native elements, you can provide classes with a class colon, then class name equals, and a Boolean expression or some signal evaluating to Boolean, and you get that class whenever the signal or the current value is true. If you're writing a custom component, I don't think you can pass that onwards or let users use the same syntax. So there's probably some things that can be done there to improve this.
Right.
But hopefully this would be the way of going about this in the future.
Yeah. And one last quick question is, are there plans for Leptonic to support nightly Rust?
Yes, there are plans. I would like to support this. It's some compilation error we get through the some callback usage we have in Leptonic. If somebody would feel would want to jump in, I've already flagged it as it needs help. I don't really know what Leptos does internally with the nightly features. It enables all for the callback stuff, and it somehow conflicts with what we do with this out type. Leptonic has a type called out, which is on some components where you can provide, when you use this component, like this slider, you have this value or this set value property. The right hand side of this this property declaration here is you could provide a callback, you could provide a write signal where the component would automatically write into. You could provide a manual closure function to accept this value, and this out type has into implementations for all these other types it used to support this, and this conflicts somehow currently with the callback definition in Leptos.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I guess there's opportunities to come on and help out Lucas develop this. Right.
Certainly.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much, Lucas. Next up, we've got Baptiste coming on to talk about Leptos internationalization. It's great to help simplify, internationalization and translations in your Leptos app. So definitely, if you're getting on working on productionizing your app, this is a good one to keep an eye on.
Hello. I'm sorry, I don't have a webcam. I had to choose between showing some code and having a webcam. So I think the code is more interesting than my face. So I'm the author of Leptos Internalization. Because I don't have a face, I'm going to try to show some code. I don't know if people can see. So this is a crate for doing some internalization for translation. I made this library because I'm coming from Next, coming from Leptos into Leptos, and I used this library that was called Next Translate, I think. And it was very easy to use. You just had to do the JSON where you put your translations. And after that, you just use a hook to access the translation. And so it was the DX to use it was very very easy and simple. And I kind of wanted something like this for coming into Leptos, because when I first tried Leptos, I saw that it has a huge potential, and I wanted to do most of my website with it. And at that time, there was no library for initialization, so I kind of made my own, and then it started to become pretty feature-proof, full feature. So
Yeah.
I'm quite happy with what is doing right now. So what you do with this library is there is the kind of the core of the library, which is the load local macro. It's a macro that's gonna look at your files and are going to create a bunch of code that you're gonna be able to use. So first there is this local enum that you can use that represents all the local that you support. So in this cargo.toml, there's a configuration that you set up here. You set up your default local and some local, and so this enum represents all the local that you set up, and then you can first you have to provide some kind of context. It's just a wrapper around like a signal for that specific local that you have at that time, and it provides some so you can set a new local or get a new local. So for example, this is an on switch function. So when can I where do I have this? Right. So if you have a button and you click on it, you can change the local. You can react on it this way and set a new local. There is this T macro that is doing a bunch of stuff, but basically what you do is you provide the context that you have been provided before, and then you put the key here. So here we have a hello world key, and so you put it here, and now where did I? It's not easy. And so this is French, because I'm sorry, I'm French. I don't know if my English is good, but so it's pretty easy to use. And basically what also what this macro does is it creates a struct that represent all the keys that you have. So the good thing that comes with it is this is type checked. This key, if you try to make another key like this one, it's going to throw an error. It's going to say that this key is not doesn't exist. So you have a type check for the keys, and you can. I'm pretty sure you even have like yeah, you have some auto completion of the keys that you have. You can do all sort of things. So for example, this one, we want to insert a component, and here a variable. I don't know what I'm doing. A variable. So we have a variable called count, and we have a component named b. And what we can do here is we can say that count here so is a variable. So it's this function. For the variable, it accepts anything that implement into view, so you can pass anything that you want. So this is just a shorthand for you could have done this if you wanted, but if you just put a variable name, it will accept it like this. And here you say it's a component, and it want a function that takes children, and return something that implements into view. I've added something not a long time ago. You can even do this if you want, and it will understand that you won't just want to do a component of name b, and it auto do the thing. So yeah, that's about most of the thing that this library does. I've wanted to most of it be the developer experience. I think it's pretty easy to use and pretty Rust-like. For now, the biggest problems I have on this library is because it's doing all the parsing for the translation, is doing all the parsing and everything. There's a lot of code that is being generated. And one of the things that come with it is all the translations are embedded in the binary. So it can add a large amount of size into the binary, and that's not great. So that's one of the things that I'm working on right now, to get rid of all the embedded translations and on the client binary, and just be able to load them when they are needed on the client. So I'm almost there, and a lot of the problems I had to implement that was mostly async stuff. So I'm pretty confident for 0.7 to have another big rewrite. But so yeah, that's most of my library. It's just to use translation in a pretty easy way. My other concern I have is to use another crate for the backend, because I don't have anything like I don't remember the name, but there is some crates made in Rust for internalization that handles like formatting of numbers, for example, based on the local, the formatting of dates and everything. And I've kind of want to add that into the library, but it's going to be a lot of work. And it's not that I don't want to do it, but for now I prefer to tackle the problem of binary size. So someone asked, how much bloat does it add to the binary, or is it lazy loaded? It's not lazy loaded. That's the problem. That's what the next update is gonna do. I'm working on it. There's like the bloat. I didn't do any comparison for now, because for if you don't have a lot of translations, there's not so much bloat, because the code to deserialize the translation is going to be pretty much bigger than just having the translation embedded. So I have to test on like way more translations than I have right now for the examples. So I don't have a metric for now, but like I would say I've tested, but basically now for this example, from what I tested, there's about 300 bytes of embedded like of strings. So it's not that big, but it's always something that is great to remove. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, well, compared to an image,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's not much. So so basically, you just have a locales directory where you keep your translation JSON.
Exactly, and you can do some namespaces if you want. This example doesn't have them, but if you want to separate your like based on, for example, different pages or different topic, you can set up this. It's pretty versatile. There's a lot of things that you can do in the setup here. You can look up. There is a book on the.
Yes, online. There's a
There is like some documentation that you can read for the different configuration, how to set up your files. It supports YAML because like someone was like, I prefer to do it in YAML, so I added that. So this is possible too. So yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I was looking at your documentation yesterday. It looks pretty simple to set up, actually.
That was like the main goal for now. I know there is a lot of things that can be improved, but I really wanted to have the developer experience first, and then tweak the internals afterward.
Yeah. The T macro works really well, and there's also another one, I think, TD.
So there is it's just a macro that instead of taking the The context, you can just do what local you want to use, and this way, if I can bring it up again, normally, no, I mean, doesn't, or because I didn't, wait, what is happening? Yeah, so for example, here, it doesn't change language. You give it here the expression that return the local that you want to use. That's it. It's just that instead of being reactive, you can compute you can give exactly the local that you want, and it doesn't depend on the setted one.
Yeah. Yeah, we couldn't see your browser, but
Why?
that's a good question.
Every time I brought up the, I'm sorry. Okay. I brought up the browser multiple time. I've just, okay, entire screen, this one. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. All right. I thought you could see my, so yeah, here it doesn't change. So if you change the language, it doesn't change the, because I set up to be only using English. So, but if I bring it back, which one is it? Is it this one? Now it changed to French when I click to change the language, and it's so yeah. That's
beautiful.
Can you zoom in on the browser? Yes, sorry. It is just reactive when so when I click on this button, it does this code here. It look for the new local. So this is reactive. It look for the new local, for the actual local, sorry, and it just gives back the new local, and it calls set local. And so this is absolutely reactive, and this macro react to the change for that local. And so when I click to change the language, it gives back the new view.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's looks super easy to use. Awesome. Have you got it updated for Leptos 0.6 now?
Yes. So there's version 0.3 now that is updated for the latest version of Leptos. And I think version 0.4 that will be coming for lazy loading of the translation is pretty much coming in about 2 weeks, I guess. I'm almost done with it. There's some little things to tweak, and then I'm gonna have some kind of alpha for it, and yeah.
That's great to hear. Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Baptiste. That's
With pleasure.
Yeah, what a great library for helping to get your app into production, and so easy to use too. Yeah, thanks for putting together those macros and the great documentation. Makes things super easy to get started with. Up next, we've got Matthew on deck, coming up to talk about Leptos hotkeys. It helps you add global and component scoped keyboard shortcuts to your app. So welcome, Matthew.
Hi, thanks, Daniel. Hey, everyone. So yeah, Leptos Hotkeys is written by Bob Junkins and me, and we help you create hotkeys in your Leptos application. We offer 3 different types of hotkeys. We offer global hotkeys that fire anywhere, that fire from anywhere in your applications. We offer scopes, so this makes your hotkeys fire only when your scope is expressed. And then we also offer focus trapped hotkeys, which allow you to embed your hotkeys with an HTML element. And yeah, all that to say is if you dig into the internals, all you'll find is just a component with 3 event listeners, a lot of global state management logic. We have a set of convenient macros that help you create hotkeys. And yeah, we arm you with a set of utility tools that allow you to manage scopes and hotkey fires. Yeah, so that's it. I will show you a quick demo.
Yeah, that'd be
And
great.
also, let's see. Cool. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So yeah, just to get started, you just need to install the crate. We support both rendering modes, so just make sure to flag the correct feature. And then yeah, the component that I was talking about is called the hotkeys provider, and you want to wrap it in your application. This sets up the event listeners and the global states. And then we also have an optional prop for your component where you can initialize a specific scope. And then, yeah, that's it. You can start creating hotkeys. And the hotkeys, here's how you can make a global one. We provide a macro. We also provide the original one. So if you prefer doing that way, that's fine too. And all this does is it kind of abstracts a couple of things. There's two props. You can either create your key binding. So this is from a keyboard event key value, and then the scope name. And this symbol is reserved for global keys. And then this move logic here, we actually just pack everything that's been written in there into a callback. And then, yeah, here's a quick demo. So we have two scopes, scope A and scope B. And then you can just toggle between the scopes. And this is using the S key. S would be a global hotkey, and it uses a toggle scope function that's provided by Leptos hotkeys. And within scope A, you can mutate or update your signals. You can also click into a specific HTML element, and then upon focus, and this one's also set for the scope A, you can change it. But if you move over, as you can see, it will take you to whatever hotkeys are over here. Yeah, that's really it. And then, yeah, a couple of things for future updates. We want to add better developer experience. So this means adding logging. You can raise like a debug flag, and it'll show you all the keys that get pressed. We also want to support, like upon refreshing, we want to maintain that scope state, and that can be done through local storage. We also want to provide some better tests. And yeah, we just want it to be as lightweight as possible, trim down the size as much as we can. So yeah, if anyone is interested, we had a lot of people raise issues. So a huge thank you to Glenn, Ravi, Makesh. Yeah, it just means a lot for, just a chunk of coal like me. And I know Bob appreciates it as well. And yeah, that's it.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I mean, if you want to build like a text editor in your browser with Leptos, yeah, you can build in all the usual, Command C, Command B, bold, whatever,
right,
hotkeys. Have you tried using it in one of your own apps, or?
Yeah, so I'm actually building Leptos K-bar, which is it's just a traditional Command K interface where you're able to navigate around your websites based on specific key bindings. So far, it's working great. It's pretty cool so far. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I just really build toy apps and just try to pass the time with it. So yeah, when I do, I always use it. So
awesome. Well, oh yes, can hotkeys do change commands like Control-Shift-A?
yeah, so we support different modifiers as well. So that's possible. We actually, a huge thing that we want to do is statically check whether the key is valid or not. We use WAS and bindgen, and that interops with the keyboard event. So we want to, since we know all the different keys that they provide us with, we can actually statically check that. So that's something that we want to do as well.
Wow. Yeah, so that's really great to hear. Thanks for your hard work on that.
Thanks. I like your sweatshirt, by the way.
Yes, we got the Leptos merch.
That's right.
Actually, these hoodies are really comfortable.
They're comfy? Oh, nice. Okay,
yeah.
Cool. I'll make sure to get one.
Yeah, do. Yeah, they're available from the Leptos store if you just go to leptos.dev. There's a store link there. Yeah. Do we have some, unless we have questions for Matt, I think we might move on to Nico up next. Nico is going to talk to us about Leptos Query, library inspired by Tanstack Query. It helps simplify data fetching and async state management for Leptos apps, as well as his other library, Leptos Image, which provides like an enhanced image component for Leptos. Automatically optimizes image size and provides image placeholders during initial load. Yes, very, very prolific contributor. Thank you, Nico.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Looking forward to hearing about your libraries.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share. Sweet. Ooh. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to start off talking about Leptos Query. And then actually, before I get started, I do want to say that I'm actually looking forward to migrating to 0.7, like whenever that comes about. I know I put Greg through the ringer a few times with some suspense issues and transition issues and resource issues in general, because Query relies on those primitives. And I think I didn't realize it was changing so much, but I'm looking forward to that. But with that said, I'll start off with Leptos Query. And so this is a library, again, heavily inspired by Tanstack Query. I have a background in web apps. I did a lot of React and then a lot of Next.js as well. And one of the primitives that I most appreciated was Tanstack Query. I thought it was just the perfect primitive to represent client-side data fetching. And when I came to Leptos, when I found Leptos last summer, this past summer, I wanted to build it because I thought it was just kind of like a missing primitive. So a lot's happened since then. I've rebuilt the core a few times, and recently, in February, I kind of stripped out all signals from the core, and then I'm plugging the signals in at the externals. And so I'm wondering how that will work with the refactor as well. But let's get into kind of what Leptos Query aims to solve. I think there's three big selling points here. One being that async state management is very difficult. There are usually, if you want highly interactive client-side applications, you need to usually duplicate some sort of asynchronous data into some sort of global state. And so then you have to, it basically requires a lot of manual state management. That's really difficult. And so this aims to kind of replace that. So it's much more simple, and I think it's really expressive. And the other thing is that there are some really cool dev tools that we'll get to later. And so that can help you kind of debug your application. So we'll get into why Leptos Query. So I mentioned that this is a asynchronous state manager. And so what is async state? And what is a query? So a query is an asynchronous request bound to a unique key. This is kind of the internal primitive for the library. And so this data, we'll call it asynchronous state. And these are some of the common properties that are common across different types of async state. The first being that you do not actually control the source of truth on the client for that state. So you can imagine when you do an API call, where's the source of truth? It's on a database usually, or it's in memory somewhere. Yeah. That's one thing. Yeah. The second being, what was that?
Can you just zoom in on the webpage a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
The other thing is that data is retrieved, is fetched asynchronously. And the third being that data, given that it's not something that you own just on the client, it could be changed by others hypothetically. If you have maybe a shared to-do list, a shared project that you're managing, that state of truth is not on the browser on your local machine. And so these properties are just specific to all things asynchronous state. And so Leptos Query aims to manage, like try to solve all of these moving parts for you. And so what I was mentioning beforehand is like, if you want a really dynamic client-side application, like you have to, for instance, get your initial state, like, and then you make an API call, retrieve your initial state. Then you store that state in a signal somewhere. And then like every time you make a change, if you want the change to be instant, you have to like then write to that signal, make sure that that write is consistent with what happened in the DB. And like that is just a really hard problem in general. Like it's just very hard to do that properly. And so, and it becomes really difficult as your app grows. So these, like, to be specific, like here are some of the common challenges when dealing with asynchronous state. One is knowing when data is out of date. Like if certain amount of time has elapsed and you know that like maybe we should be rechecking this data, like that should be something that's handled. Being able to show out of date data while the new data is being fetched is important too, just to have like the best interactivity. You also want to be able to use the same like a piece of asynchronous state in multiple places in your UI. Like that's important. So I mean, you're sure you're just not spamming calls for no reason across your app. And then maybe these are all important, but I think I've spoken enough. And like these are basic. I want to get to like what Leptos Query like will provide to you practically. I think one is like you don't have to do that duplication. You don't have to do that client-side state management, but you can still get all the benefits of client-side, like really really granular updates and like and those sorts of things. But so that's one thing. It's really hard to do it. It's almost always it's buggy. Like sometimes like I've been on so many pages where the state gets out of sync. You have to refresh the whole thing. Just not a good like user experience, and it's also hard to develop. And the other is like basically just improving the performance and the speed of your app. Like if you don't have to wait for something to reload, it just is such a nice experience for the user. And then we also have a cool debugging experience with the dev tools. So now that I've spoken a lot, I will transition to the quick start guide just to show some code, and then I'll jump into some examples. So if we go back here, we go to the crate docs. I'll make this bigger. I just want to show how like simple it is to get started. Basically, when you in your app, you just have to call this provide query client. It just initializes the context for you. And then there are some other ones that you can use if you want to like use a specific type of persister, or you want to provide like global options for all of your queries to use. The next thing is that you want to create a query. So this is kind of what it looks like. So every query has, it's like data bound to a specific key. And so let's say we're getting like a list of songs, a list of tracks. They have a name. And then each of those tracks have their own unique ID. And so minor annoyance is that you have to implement all of these traits, but it is what it is. And basically we have this fetcher. Just imagine it fetches some data asynchronously and gives you back some track data. And so what we have here is a query scope. And then when you go to your app, it looks like this. Like you just call track query.use query, and then you get back your query result. And so this is something that's cached globally on the client across your application. So anywhere that you use track query, use query with the same ID, it will pull from the same cache. And what's really interesting about this is that you only have to provide one cache globally, despite whatever key value pair type you're using. And so there's some reflection stuff that's done there. And then it pretty much just acts like a resource. So you have this data signal, and then you just have to read it within a transition. And so this is kind of what Greg was talking about, where you have to call map because it's an option, and then you return the actual, what you want to render. With the data.
Yeah, and so that refetches, you can refetch in the background as well, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things here. We can look at it quickly.
As well as, I think you can refetch on an interval, like define an interval.
Yes.
Where you want data updated. That's really handy.
You do have a refetch function here. I'm actually looking to change this to be not a function to be something that is a copy. But yeah, these are all of the types that you can take out. So the data, the state, and this is basically an enum of what the state is, and then kind of some Boolean signals if you want to use those. But if we go back here, I think we'll look at some examples so I can show kind of what this does to your user experience. And so the first thing here is kind of like a 1v1 query versus resource. And so we have two things up here. So the first being a query, and then one being a resource. And it does the same thing. It fetches from like JSON placeholder API. And basically whatever this signal is, it will fetch the corresponding data for that signal, for like that post ID. So if we just look at a resource, this is just the primitive that you get by default. So if every time that you change this, you will reload, and it doesn't matter in what direction. So if you go back down to 3, if you go back down to 2, back down to 1, despite us having fetched that, you will always refetch that. And so by contrast with query, like you still do that initial fetch, but then every time that you go back, that data is just instantly loaded.
Right. Yeah, it's already cached.
Yeah, and so like that is like if you go back home and you come back here, like that still appears instantly. And now I think I can do a quick like overview of the dev tools here. So this is like I think a really useful thing just in general. Like Tanstack Query has one of these, and so this is again very, very inspired. And so what you can see here is like, okay, we have this post query key, and that has a value of 1, which is kind of this post ID. So when you click it, you can see kind of all of the properties of that query. You can see it, what the stale time is, what the garbage collection time is, how many active observers are looking at this query. And then you can also see all of the data. And that's you can also invalidate it. And if it gets invalidated, it will refetch automatically if it's active. But there's just, you can sort, you can clear the cache, you can do a bunch of things. So this is just like a really useful tool for debugging, and you can just load it into your app. And by default, it only runs in debug mode, and you can override that if you want. But that's kind of the overview of kind of like the simple case. And then I want to do one more example with optimistic updates. I think this is where you can really see Leptos Query shine. So this is basically a to-do app. This is a CSR page, like it doesn't have any backend, so I'm emulating it with like a thread local variable, but you can do like update tests and then do the tests. And when I create here, the actual mutation, like it does, everything has a sleep of 1 second, but the whole UI is completely instant. And the way that that's done is that it uses kind of all of the primitives that Leptos Query gives you. So like what's actually going on here is like, 1, any outgoing all to-dos query that's going out right now, when we add a new to-do, if there's one in progress, we want to cancel it. We don't want to see stale data again. So first we have to cancel any outgoing query. Second, we have to then add a query to the current like cache, to the current list. So this is basically a list of these to-dos. Then we execute the mutation, which takes 1 second. And then when we get the to-do back from the mutation, because adding a to-do returns a to-do, then you stick that new value back into the cache. And then after you do that, you invalidate. So what this basic workflow is like, I'm going to optimistically update my local state on my client as fast as possible. And then I'm going to invalidate at the end of that whole workflow so I can confirm that change with the server in a way. And so it basically gives you the best of both worlds. Like you have pretty much like instant updates. Same with deletions. Like you can delete these things and they're gone. And each of those deletions takes a second. And you never see like an intermediate state. You never see any of these other things. And it really like, it's like best in class experience. Like it doesn't get more instant than this. So, and these are the types of apps that Leptos Query helps you build.
Right. So with the optimistic update, you do that manually, and then okay.
So like there's because those relationships are really complex. Like they're as complex as you want them to be. Maybe you want to like, you have like a single to-do query, and then based on the list of to-dos coming back, you want to update that's all of the single ones. You can do that. And so, and you can do so in a type safe way. Like there is that create query function here, like returns a query scope. And these are all of the operations that you could do: canceling, fetching, peeking at the current state, subscribing to it, prefetching it if you're on a route that you want to like fetch that data in advance. And there's a lot of things here.
Yeah. So how do you know when the update has actually completed?
What do you mean?
To switch over from your optimistic update to
Yeah, we can look at the code if you want. But this would be the delete example. But
Yeah.
this is an async function. You get the query of all to-dos. You cancel any outgoing all to-dos. Then you delete that one from the list of to-dos. This is like a mutable reference.
Yeah.
To a vector, and then you delete it. So all of this happens like before you actually do the deletion. And then you delete it, and then you invalidate it. This is like the important step. This is like confirm with server. So this will automatically refetch the all to-dos, and then like whatever you get back there, like that's the true state. Like the server owns that state, is responsible for it.
Of course.
So yeah, that's kind of most of it. There's also a really cool feature for like client-side persistence. So you can actually like choose what persister you want, and you can do so on the fly. It's pretty interesting. But so if we go back here, like let's say we load a whole bunch of these. See, our cache is like has a bunch of them, and we just switch our persister to being IndexedDB. Like if we go to our IndexedDB, like everything will be there. Like you see all of your stuff there, and then when you like come back, like you already have that post 1, you already have post 2, you already have, all these posts are already preloaded for you. So this is also like just something that's pretty useful. Yeah, to get again like best in class like client side experience.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing up those dev tools. That makes things really easy to work with.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, hi Nico, Rakshit here. First of all, thank you so much for making this framework. This is amazing. I just had a question that I wanted to ask you, if that's okay. With the optimistic update, so would it be possible for a user to, let's say, show a loading screen that, hey, this is still being confirmed with the server before we actually, show it on the UI? So let's say, for example, if we can go to the optimistic update examples on your, yep. So if I create new, would it be possible for me to have, let's say, a translucent version of the card to show that, hey, this is still being updated on the server, but here it is on your UI, and once it updates on the server, it kind of becomes opaque to show that, hey, this is confirmed. I was just wondering if it's possible for us to know the state of that particular update.
It's definitely possible. I don't know like how simple it is. That's something that I'm actually looking to build, is like kind of more kind of like baked in support for mutations. Because like kind of what that would be there's basically 2 ways to do it. Like the way that would work now is that in your like to-do list, let me add it first. But in your to-do list, you'd basically add a field here like confirmed. And so in the process of doing your data fetch, you just like add like confirm true, confirm false. And then when you're doing your actual render for a to-do, you'd basically check that field. And then that would kind of let that happen in a way. So like when you do the fetch, like confirmed is true. And then when you insert into the cache, just make sure that you have that insert false or like up like that field set to false. And then it will like, you can blur it out, do conditional rendering there. I think a better way would be to have like basically a way to subscribe to mutations. So then you could like subscribe to some sort of like key that for like adding a to do or whatever. And then you could see like if this ID is currently being added, like show me as blurry. And that would be a little bit like less granular into like, I need to make these updates to my cache or to my like existing data structures I'm storing in my cache. If that makes sense.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah. Well, that looks amazing. Thank you so much for all your hard work. I've yet to try out Leptos Query myself, but yeah, I'm looking forward to giving it a shot. And you've built Leptos Image as well, hey?
Yep. I could also give a demo of that. So Leptos Image, I don't have like anything super nicely done, but I can show kind of what it does and a demo of it like on my personal website. That's originally why I built it. But this is I think images are just something that are really important for websites in general. Like that's like when a website feels slow, it's like one of the first things that makes a website feel slow. And so I think it's important to get these things right, especially for static websites. Like it's understandable if you have like a data set of like, I don't know, 1 million images and then like you can't just render them. But if it's something static, like it's that at build time, I think it's important. It's also easier. But
especially for loading on mobile, images are huge and heavyweight if you don't optimize them properly. And depending on your on your network connection speed, it can really make things feel slow when often images are just there to kind of fill up space or make things more visually appealing. So you automatically optimize. Do you, like, say if I have like a JPEG image, is that you automatically optimize that to, I think it's WebP, right?
Yeah. So kind of the main workflow, like for now, these images do have to be like included in your public folder or whatever folder has those static assets that you specify in like Cargo Leptos. And this is also only SSR, like this doesn't have CSR support. But the main process is that I think I'll just show a demo first. So like, what does this actually look like? Maybe that's too slow. But when you first get, is that too fast?
It's always nice to see Leptos in production, even if it is just on a personal blog.
Yeah, so this library basically does two things. So on that first load, you'll have those like low quality image placeholders, like those blurry things, like that'll be the background of your image.
Right.
And that's something that's like just to like it looks really clean. Like you immediately get some sort of feedback, and it's also like exactly what the image looks like. Like and they're really small. Like I think they're like 10 pixels or something. And so that's what it does. And then all of these images are also like properly sized. They're all like relatively small. Like you can specify the height and width and the quality. So like what you want to compress it into for the WebP.
Right.
But that's kind of the user experience for it. And like the way that it works behind the scenes is that basically there's two entry points, or there's one entry point, but there's two things that you have to do. One is like three things. One is like provide the actual image context to your app. The second is like integrate this image optimizer type into your Axum state. I thought about doing this as an extract thing, but as a extension rather, but I thought the type safety was better here. It is a little bit more manual though. So you bake that into your Axum state, and then you basically on your router, there's an extension method type of thing where you can just add a cache route, and then that's pretty much it. That you have to call these two right here. But what that does is like makes the state kind of accessible on the SSR render. And then once you have that set up, then you just use the image component that's provided to you by Leptos image. And then every image is like kind of serialized using Serde query string into a specific query string. And then it takes that, it looks at the cache. Do I have this image ID like specification, like with specific height, width, like path, all these things, blurriness, and it will generate it for you and insert it into this image optimizer cache, which is like a dash map. So it's pretty quick for like different types of images. And then this will basically, it will check that cache. Does it already exist? If it does, I'm going to throw in that SVG like into that preloaded HTML, into the first like SSR HTML with a blocking resource. And otherwise, I'm going to just add that URL. But that's pretty much like, that's what it does. Like very heavily inspired again by like Next.js. Like that's something that they provide to you like kind of baked into the framework. I think one thing that's super cool about Leptos is like something like this is possible without having to be a framework author in a way. Like the primitives are so good and like so granular that you can make things like this, and because of like the isomorphic nature of it. But yeah, that's kind of what I have for Leptos image.
Well, that's great. Actually, Jessica Skinner-Bless is asking, Leptos query, is that production ready today?
I think so. Like I use it, but if there are any issues, I'm pretty quick to patch them up. Like the dev tools, I think we've had like 15 releases for Leptos query. Like I think it's in a good spot. Like it obviously will need to be reworked a lot for 0.7, but I think it's pretty stable. And like I've put a lot of time into like making sure that the core is like safe and stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do you use that on your website as well?
Yeah, I do for the blog post. Like it's not the most heavy thing, but it's actually pretty funny. I can show you. But the way that it works here is like, oh,
yeah. Well, it certainly helps to dog food your own stuff.
So one of the things that's interesting is like basically whatever page that you load on, like I'm doing get all posts every time. And so this goes and gets kind of the post preview for this page. So like this is instant. But that's what I use it for. And then all of these like what are also queries. But
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would think like the canonical example of where you might use that would just be in like refreshing stock quotes, that sort of thing, right? But yeah, there's really any highly interactive app, it would make a great addition to, and yeah, it really helps to get things into production quickly. Hagbard Celine is asking, is there a path to make Leptos query work with server functions and SSR?
Oh, that's the thing. It is fully, I didn't mention that, but it is fully compatible with SSR. So let's say you use one query in like a few different parts of your application during your SSR, like it will only fetch once. And so it does this by like not fetching in the resource exactly. Like the resource will be just suspended and then set by Leptos query, like once it's resolved internally, like in the execution model. But it's fully compatible with SSR. Like if I were to like load a page on my website, like you will not see that like fetch made from the client, like it will be streamed in.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that looks great. And thank you so much for your hard work. We've got one more question coming in. Quickly before you go, I realize that the stream's running a little bit long, so I do apologize for that. But
no problem.
Hey, Nico, while we wait on that other question, I just wanted to jump in and say there's a lot of DMs and chatter going on that everyone is super impressed and stoked about what you've made. So I just wanted to jump in and say thanks and great job, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So question for you. Does Leptos image generate the images at compile time or at runtime?
At runtime. I think it's like the only, I had them done so like you could do it. It's always going to be at runtime. Like it's too expensive. It like image processing is expensive. And like I have a built-in like semaphore so that basically you can limit how many images are processed at once. Because like, let's say I deploy my website on Fly.io, and like if I just say generate all of them, like it destroys the memory. So I think it's really important not to do it like ahead of time. And it also gives you just significantly more flexibility just in general. Like if the way that it's structured now, it wouldn't be too hard to just do any image at all. Like it doesn't have to be in your like public assets folder.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So they're just generated as needed and then cached. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Bassarin Garin is asking, does Leptos Query have some concept of get all versus get one in a CRUD API?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So if we look at, for instance, I don't have a good demo of this now, but this one actually would be the to-dos. So we could look at that. So all to-dos, you can see that if we look at the actual code, it's going to take me a little while. But so this is a key that is just a struct, like it doesn't have any parameters. So you do always have to provide a unique key for your value, but this is kind of like a get all in a way. Like there's no dynamicism to the key. The key is always the same key. And then you can return all of your to-dos. And then if you contrast that with the single, that is a query key that looks like this, like that has that U32 like value in it that's dynamic. So that's kind of how you would model these things. One versus many.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so you can get as just one entity as pull it out. Yeah. Oh, looks good. I'm loving those dev tools. Yeah, I'm really excited to try it out. Thank you again. I think that yeah, pretty much wraps things up for our stream here. Oh, yeah. So we've got a little networking session coming up on Discord here. Yeah, we're just going to have, yeah, if you guys want to get in touch with the library authors, ask them any more questions, or if you feel like you want to start contributing, yeah, get in touch. Leptos Discord. Remember to check out the Leptos store. Get your own little hoodie like this. Yeah, we're going to be streaming last Saturday of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So the next Leptos Monthly Meetup is going to be on March 30th. And until then, yeah, remember to have a little R&R, rest and relax. So look forward to seeing you on Leptos Discord.